me now, Robert? Are you hearing me now, everybody? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Love technology. We're just sorting out Jeremy. Jeremy is joining us via phone. He sees our slides, but he doesn't have a video cam, so you'll only hear his voice. We're just sorting through that. That's why I've logged on just a little bit early to make sure that he is good to go before we start. So far, Jeremy, I don't hear you, so you may want to dial back in and do it the way that we had originally planned. Hello from Comox. Hello from Campbellton. Okay. Okay, hello, Jeremy.
Hi.
So this works.
Was this in fact how we practiced it?
Yes, this is what we did. Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it differently than the way we rehearsed.
Hello from Vancouver. Okay, Rob, tell me where Campbellton is. I don't know where that is. Petawawa, lovely. Okay. Awesome. So those of you that are joining us this morning, this is the first, North Shore of New Brunswick. Okay, I have never been to New Brunswick. I've been to a few spots out east, but that is not one of them. So I definitely need to get out there eventually when we can fly again. Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, Adam, Rhonda. Hello, everyone. Yeah, you're not going to hear anybody speak, Jeremy, because they're all chatting with me online. So you should be able to see that on your screen. Off to your right, Jeremy, you will see a little chat box and people are communicating there. Good morning from Cold Lake. Lovely, just up the road from us. Great. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Heather Gurrow-Miller. This webinar series is going to happen over the next 6 weeks. And just so that you know, we are starting half an hour earlier today than we will be starting all of our other weeks. Just the timing that was available for us on the webinar schedule forced that situation for us. So if you decide after today that you'd like to join us again, all our other weeks will be starting at 10:30. Awesome. Excellent. Okay. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself? Hello, Jeremy?
Just give me 1 minute,
okay.
Heather.
No
I
worries.
gotta make my screen synchronized.
Okay, no problem. Hello from Gatineau. Hello, beautiful out there. We have a beautiful day so far, although we're having typical prairie weather this week where we get these lovely hot daytimes that are very humid, almost tornado-like weather where there's this humidity followed by thunderstorms at night. I'm a prairie girl. I grew up out here, and it's that's pretty frequent. My mom used to wake me up late at night just so I could watch the thunderstorms when I was a kid. I have always really liked that. Hi from Borden. Hello, Francis.
Okay, Heather, I am ready to go if you are.
Okay, all right. I think we are good to go, everybody. So we will get started so that we are punctual. So as I said, this is a 6-webinar series. So I just wanted to quickly walk you through what is coming up so that you know what you could sign up for in the future. Our first 3 webinar series will be hosted by myself and Jeremy Parasini, who is reconditioning out of Suffield, Alberta. Our last 3 webinar series will be hosted by myself again, and our reconditioning team out of Edmonton, Aaron Tresur and Kevin Malahy. So those are going to be our guests speakers, a very knowledgeable group of folks that are going to help us out. So this week, as you saw, we are going to be talking about when you're exercising through pain. Following these weeks, our second week is more looking at systems versus goals and how we can approach safe and effective training that's going to reduce our risk of injury and produce results. Our third week is about rest and recovery and balancing that with work at the right ratios to actually achieve results and lower our risk of injury. Our next week will be on foam rolling. We'll be talking about what does the evidence tell us and what are the do's and don'ts of foam rolling. The fifth week is on concussions, which we will be discussing symptoms that you should be watching for, talking about how to reduce your risk, and we will be looking at what is the healthcare provider's role for you in that scenario. And the last week, which may be a bit of a unknown topic to many of you, we're going to be talking about end range strength and mobility, what it is, why you would want it, and how you will go about achieving more of that, why it would actually be beneficial to you in improving your performance, but also in reducing your risk of injury. So as I said, I am Heather Garreau-Miller. I am one of the health promotion specialists in Edmonton. I've been with D&D for 22 years this year. I am a registered kin, but I am taking a back seat on these topics to allow the expertise of our reconditioning team to kind of come through. So I'll be doing less talking, hopefully, than normal. So Jeremy, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and introduce our topic for us this morning.
Yes, thank you, Heather. Well, I got a real job in 2010 after I made a very good college attempt at doing triathlon for a few years. So I managed to do 9 Ironmans, and the 10th one did me. And this is why I just like to briefly say that it would be very hypocritical of me to tell everybody in this audience that I'm going to try to convince you through this workshop that the only proper type of physical exercise is the type that's at an intensity that doesn't hurt. The truth is that, especially as insiders, we know that what really matters is the type of pain that you're experiencing, whether or not this is coming from pushing systems and growing them, or if this is coming from systems that are failing. And so that is what really got me interested in giving a workshop of this nature, is helping people distinguish between those two. So let's get going. I hope that becomes more clear.
And I picked out this quote for this slide because, interestingly enough, I saw this quote written on the back of a military member's t-shirt at the gym. And unfortunately, I really think that this is a real pervasive belief within our organization. And it can be potentially leading many of our personnel to injuries that are completely avoidable with good coaching or some physical therapy as well. So we're really trying to address what we would like to see you guys do in these scenarios. Is everybody not hearing me? Can anybody let me know if you're hearing me? I'm seeing some people coming up and saying, can hear me fine? Okay. You hear? Yes? Okay. All right. So if you're hearing a little bit fuzzy, you may want to just try hitting the refresh button. We have had that situation when we've been on video conferencing with our teams through Ottawa, that people are struggling to hear, and when they hit refresh, they hear a little bit better. So that's the first time I've had that experience on my end, but give that a try and see how that goes for you. Okay. Yes, my colleague is joining me via phone, so it's not going to be as great a sound as we would like, but we're going to do the best we can this morning. Okay. So just before we get started, those of you that have joined us for other webinars know that we need to go through this disclaimer for ourselves. Before we are started, the presentation you are about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of sensitive nature. That is highly unlikely today. However, parental discretion is always requested if you have little ones' ears around. Please understand that people's stories are theirs alone to tell, and anything that is shared by the participants, whether it be on camera or in the chat, is not to be discussed outside of the webinar. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on in the CAF Connection. They're very close to having that go live for us. And though we encourage active participation, you may simply want to follow along without using the chat, video, microphone options if you prefer. That's always okay with us, although the more participation and questions we have, the more fun it tends to be with for you. Okay. So before we begin, as we have always asked, we just want to find out who you are. So if you could just let us know in the poll off to your right, how many of you are from each area of our organization. Awesome. Great. Large number of serving members. That's excellent. Thank you. Nice. I'm glad to see we have at least one from every category, so that's awesome to see. Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing that with us. So Jeremy, we're going to get you to start and tell us a little bit about what the difference is between acute and chronic pain.
Thanks, Heather. I'm going to speak up, but if anybody in the chat is having difficulty hearing my voice, let me know and I'll try to speak even more clearly. Well, as we mentioned in the last slide, with this workshop, I'm hoping to make it clearer when you're experiencing the type of pain that's indicative of injury versus the type of pain indicative of, well, like maybe we would call this a growth pain, systems that are in growth, right? But the truth is that even pain that comes from injury, from failing systems, I'd like to split that hair even a little bit more, because there's types of injury that are obvious, that are hard to not be aware of. So, we're talking about, as an example, a broken bone or, a scraping wound or something like that. And there is a set of preventive practices around that type of injury. Here in this workshop, I'm especially focused on the type of injury that is coming from chronic stress. Okay, so this is usually invisible, or at least to see it, it's going to be very difficult. This is really the hard case. And but with a little knowledge actually helps a lot. Okay, so the preventive measures here are a lot less obvious. So just to briefly sum this up, let's look at the example of running, right? And let's cart out any type of tripping that might occur while you're running, any falling, right? Let's just look at what's happening inside certain joints, especially when that's taking place. So especially the ankle, the knee, and the hip. When that is taking place, we have bones that are being pushed into other bones at certain joints, right? That is a stress. Like a single instance of that stress, probably not a big deal. But if this happens sufficiently, a sufficient number of times, now we can get cartilage being worn away. We have an osteoarthritic type of injury, right? So with this workshop, what I'm hoping is that you're going to have a better idea for when that stress is starting to get out of control. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. So really, we're looking at that difference between that pain that's sort of always there based on repetitive types of movements that we might be doing versus that one severe traumatic event that causes an injury that might be going on, or possibly just a scuff. Either of those would still be considered that acute. So we want to ask you a question, guys, before we get started, and that is just asking you, how many of you have experienced a pain response while you exercise that wasn't getting better, and yet you kept training anyway? So a few answers that we can give. Yes, I kept training in the same way. No, I stopped training until the pain stopped. Yes, but with modifications from a health professional, or yes, with modifications of my own. Okay. Okay, so a huge number of you with modifications of your own. And that's great that you're making decisions. We always wonder how well that's working out for you if you're not sure where those issues are coming from. So when you're thinking about continuing to train despite having that kind of pain, why are you continuing to do that rather than take rest? And we're not saying that's wrong, but why are we opting for doing that instead of taking a rest day? And what might be the consequences of training in the same way you were training before when you're having that pain response? It's the Army mindset, suffer in silence. Absolutely. I have met people that have run on severely sprained ankles while because they didn't want to let their chain of command know that they were injured because they didn't want to be sidelined. And sadly, unfortunately, when we take actions like that, all we do is make the issue worse for ourselves, and we end up sidelined far longer because we exacerbate the issue for ourselves. So it's very interesting. And yet there are some compensatory types of things, as we're going to talk about today, that can actually go on for years and years. And people seem to just sort of slug through it. That's not to say that they don't pay a price for it, but definitely there are people that do that. I know better now, yes, and I'm trying to rest through it. Yeah, but you're also retired, absolutely. So it's so different, right? I started my career with D&D, working in fitness and sports, and now that I sit behind a desk, it's much easier for me to make good choices for myself. But I definitely have paid a price for a lot of the decisions I made back when I was on that side of the house, for sure. Okay. So I wanted to share a bit of a story with you just to kind of give you a sense of what we're talking about with regards to that. I'm not young anymore, and my primary form of exercise at this point is hiking and walking. I spend a lot of time doing that. And I think that's probably something that many or most of us can relate to, is that we all have to walk from one place to another unless we're different mobile. And I think about what that might occur in that situation that might start to cause me issues. So you're walking along and maybe you begin to notice a soreness that starts in the feet. And maybe that soreness travels up towards the knee. Then after changing your shoes and you maybe try shortening up your stride a little bit, you feel a little bit of relief, and that lasts for a little while. But then all of a sudden you've continued to train with those small modifications, and all of a sudden you notice pain in your hip. So what is that telling us? All the while we keep walking. We keep managing that pain with post-hike ibuprofens and hot baths and stretching or massage. And it's only when we're absolutely forced to take that time off of the activity that we've chosen that we see that pain fully disappear. But just shortly after I resume my hiking routine again, the pain reappears. So I start to wonder, are my days of long walks coming to an end? Are my days of hiking coming to an end? Maybe this is no longer an activity that's going to work for me. And while those conclusions are understandable, they may not necessarily be true. There just might be some things we're doing that need shifting and need changing.
Yes, Heather, and now we're getting sort of to the heart of the matter, because now this word, which might look like a big word, it's honestly a very simple concept. So this is an important concept here. It's a compensatory movement pattern. So the picture that Heather just described, it is very possible that what is happening here is that there is a deficiency or an injury. And this injury not being cured, it is causing the body to compensate in various different ways. And each of these compensations has there's a cost to pay for it. And usually these compensations are a way for excess stress to be produced, and for an injury or at least a pain response to come from that. And if you could just get to the heart of the issue, to the root of the problem, then and often, this is doable and it's possible to cure it. Well, now you're able to do whatever movement it is. Okay, so what is a compensatory movement pattern exactly? Well, as I said, it is actually common to everyday life. We actually see this all around us. Okay, so let's take the example of a bench press to use a gross example here. So obviously, if you load that barbell heavy enough or with enough weight, you're going to fail to be able to lift it, right? Now, the truth is actually, though, that before the point where you're unable to lift that amount of weight, you're actually going to be unable to lift it properly, okay? And so what is going to happen at this point is and we see this all the time, like the bar starts to shift around. It moves up, it moves down, you favor one side or another, it moves forward, it moves back as different muscle groups start to do more or less of the work. That's the neuromuscular system on its own, just compensating, right? Moving in a different way. It's an alternate strategy to accomplish a similar type of movement, right? So to use another very easy to understand example, we have a bruised ankle, a sore ankle, right? So, when this happens, well, more or less, without you even thinking about it, you simply end up favoring the uninjured leg, right? The one that is not inducing the pain response. That is another compensatory movement, okay? So those are two easy examples of it. But Heather, if we can move on to slide number 9. Well, in this workshop, I'd like to delve more into the less obvious instances of compensatory movement. Because if there was the better that you understand this, the better that you're able to notice it when it's happening in you and stop these things from getting out of control. Stop the domino effect, which we're going to get to soon. Okay, so in this, what you see on your screen right now, in the background of all this, so you see, well, you're just seeing a man running on the road, right? And well, this is a normal gait pattern for the most part, what you're seeing there, right? Now, if you look to the right of your screen, if you look at these two women, by the way, the shot was taken in Hawaii Ironman 2003, and I was in that race. But in any event, if you look at, so what you're seeing here right now is compensatory movement that is less obvious. This is the marathon stage of Ironman. This is after a 3.8 kilometer swim and a 180K bike ride. And at this point in the marathon, they're about 30K into it. Okay. And if you look at the woman in the yellow colored bathing suit, look at her knees, how close together they are. It turns out that the angle that bone between the knee and the hip, the angle that bone, it turns inwards and it turns outward in the joint. Okay, and the degree to which it's turned inward or outward is actually very important. Okay, there's a set of muscles. If you look in the box, well, the middle box, the one with the white background, right? What you're seeing there is you're seeing a human pelvis. You're looking at the human being from their backside, okay? And we've peeled away the large superficial muscles, the gluteus maximus especially. So we're seeing deep inside that pelvis, okay? So there's 6 muscles. These are small guys, Latin-sounding names, and they're not very strong. They don't produce a lot of force, but they have a very important job. Okay, and their job for running is to control the position of that bone between the hip and the knee, to turn it outwards. Okay, so if it's your right leg, it turns your right foot outwards. On your left side, it turns your left foot outwards. Okay, that's their role. In fact, really, their role is to keep that bone stable. They're not going to pull that bone in one direction or another if the opposing set of muscles is pulling it the other way. You see, if we have one set of muscles pulling on that bone in one direction, and then we have another set of muscles pulling on it in the opposite direction, now we have a bone that is just resists movement, okay? And that is actually an ideal state, right? So why are we going into all this again? Well, we're going into this because, as this photo on the right of our screen demonstrates, it's possible for these muscles to become fatigued. I mean, you stress them enough and they are going to become fatigued. And we have an example of this. I mean, and you can especially see it in that lady in the background of that right image, right? The lady wearing the two-piece bathing suit, the dark-colored one. She's compensating in different ways. You can see on her, it's a little bit less clear, but you can see that the inside surface of her foot is caving in. Her knees are also coming together. I mean, each of these women is showing a lot of different compensatory movements, right? And the important point is that they're not doing it on purpose. They're not aware that it's happening. There's stress building up as a result of it. And if that gets out of control, now there can be problems. Okay, so if we can move on to slide number 10, at the risk of putting too fine a point on it, I'm just going to give you another tell here when you're compensating. Okay, so you're seeing in the foreground of this photograph 3 different runners, one in a red colored shirt, one in a darker colored shirt, one in a white colored shirt. Okay, so we're going to do something that's improper biomechanical analysis just to prove a point, and that's that let's just take this one moment in time. Okay, so if you compare the guy wearing the red shirt to the guy wearing the white colored shirt, you might look at that and say, little difference here, right? Well, the truth is that the guy in the white colored shirt, do you notice how he is turning his arms? Well, he's got his left hand below his chin, and the guy in the red colored shirt appears to instead be moving his arms and his hands forwards and backwards. This may seem like an incredibly trivial part of running, but in reality, whether or not you are turning your arms more forwards and backwards or more side to side, this is reflecting whether or not you have a compensatory movement pattern in progress, whether or not you are fatigued enough that now your body is compensating for that fatigue by, by recruiting muscles to do more work than they usually do. This is sort of the equivalent of what happens in a bench press when you overload that bar and you start to not do the movement properly. It's just that this is a less obvious case of it, right? So I think that brings to mind the domino effect that Heather's going to talk about next.
So I like to use the image of a domino game because it really is what's going on in the body when we start to compensate and where the problems really come from. The compensation itself is just a signal to us that potentially something needs to be addressed in our body. So like the game of dominoes, when one tile falls, you're going to have another one fall and another one fall just as quickly just as compensations would in the body. So from when one muscle starts to compensate, then another will have to follow. It's only a matter of time or when and where that's going to happen. And many of those compensation patterns are so subtle that we don't even maybe notice them. But they can grow to be really large over time. So I'm just going to give an example that is more everyday type of activity. So let's take somebody that works in a warehouse, let's say 7CFSD in Edmonton, our supply unit, where they have this massive warehouse, concrete floors, and their job requires them to stand and walk on that concrete floor all day long. Now, if you think about that concrete, it isn't giving like other natural surfaces would be, like dirt or grass might be. So it can be very difficult on the foot. It's not malleable to the foot. So let's see how that scenario would look if the dominoes fall for this warehouse worker. So in the first domino, we're seeing somebody standing on that hard surface for extended periods of time. And then what ends up happening is the posterior tibialis, which is one of our calf muscles, which is all you really need to know, becomes overworked in order to try to maintain the support arch in the foot. And over time, this muscle weakens due to the chronic stress that's placed on it. In such a routine, one of the muscles that's going to end up getting stressed will end up causing the collapse of that foot when that muscle becomes too weak. Okay, so then the second domino is going to fall. You see that foot starting to pronate in the second scenario, which is going to collapse to the floor. What ends up happening in this situation is that the posterior tibialis, that calf muscle, has become so tired that it can't function as well anymore. And that's going to lead us to that third domino. And that third domino is going to entail a couple of different muscles getting overworked. What happens once that foot starts to collapse in is the shin bone is starting to move towards the midline of the body. And our body doesn't want to be in that position. Our body is going to want to try to track that knee over the foot as much as it possibly can. So what will end up happening is the peroneals, which are calf muscles, and the biceps femoris, which is one of our hamstring muscles, are going to be contracting to try to stabilize that knee and bring everything back. So now we started with a tired calf muscle that led to a collapsed foot, that led to this eccentric contraction that's constantly going on in the thigh and in the calf. Now, as I said, those things might seem to be very subtle at first. You may not notice them until you sort of have those aching arches that are coming along, but you're like, oh, I just stood on my feet all day. There's nothing big going on. But no matter what we try to do, what's going to end up happening is one strategy of compensation in human movement will always lead to another. No matter how subtle that first domino is, the second domino is going to fall, and one after the other. And the difficulty for a health professional is, once we let so many of those dominoes fall, it becomes very challenging for the physical therapist or the trainer to be able to figure out where all of that initiated from in the first place. So oftentimes if we're addressing those things when we first notice them, it's much easier for a health professional to help us quickly and get us back to where we want to be faster. The longer we wait, the trickier it's going to be for that health professional to help us find our way back to a normal routine for us. Okay, go ahead, Jeremy.
That's actually very true. And what Heather was just saying about trying to get to the root of all this once dominoes have started to fall, the situation is quite hairy at that aspect, right? So I think at this point, it's worth just going a little bit into a structure that is a common site for chronic stress to get deposited. I mean, if you're overdoing it, and there's a domino effect in progress, then the IT band is a common location for a lot of that stress to go. So this is a term that is also bandied around quite a lot in, well, not just the running community, but I think just broadly. So what is this structure? Okay, the iliotibial band this is a ligament. It is a structure that connects one bone to another. And in this case, it's connecting that hip bone. So you can see this on the left of your screen. It's just that red colored, that red colored item there. It's just connecting, so the top of more or less the top of your hip to one of the bones in your lower leg, or one of the bony eminences of that bone. Okay, so the interesting thing about the iliotibial tract, well, perhaps this is a wonky thing, but this is where two muscles are attached to. Skeletal muscle doesn't usually attach to a ligament. Usually we think of a skeletal muscle as something that just makes bones move and therefore attaches straight to a bone. Well, in this case, the iliotibial band is what, of note, two muscles attached to. So one of these is the gluteus maximus. So this is the large, powerful musculature in the back of your pelvis. It's what is enabling you to push your leg in a backwards direction with force, okay, or perhaps resist forward motion of the leg. Okay, so there's that one, but then there's another one that is also pulling on the IT, well, attaching to it, and that is a very obscure sounding muscle. Let's call it the TFL. Okay, so the TFL is not located on the back towards your posterior, towards your back side. It's actually located towards your front side, sort of to the side as well. But the point is that these two muscle groups, they don't do exactly the opposite thing, but they do have fairly opposing effects. Okay, so the gluteus maximus is pulling that IT, or it's putting tension on it from behind. The TFL is putting tension on it from in front. Okay, so why is that important? That is important because if we have a gluteus maximus that is not firing, so it's not very active, well, then that IT is not being pushed behind as much as perhaps it needs to be ideally situated. And if at the same time we have a TFL that is overactive and it's really pulling on that IT, that is helping, well, that's making the situation even worse. And the IT band is especially, well, it's a very common, if you're experiencing chronic knee pain, so this is very common. Like a lot of people complain of chronic knee pain when they run, especially coming from the outside of the knee, right, as opposed to the inside. Quite often the case, it is the case that it's the IT that this is the IT showing that it's being damaged, and it's being damaged because it's out of position. Okay, and it's out of position because we have an imbalance. The gluteus maximus has been overly fatigued, and that IT has been pulled to a position where it doesn't like being. Just another quick note about IT. I don't want, well, there's a lot of confusion about there that the IT band is something that stretches, and you hear about IT band stretches all the time. So just a quick note on that is that the iliotibial, well, that ligament between the hip and the knee, there's also fascia that connect to it. So this is just thinner tissue, and it runs basically around the whole upper leg. But like a ligament, this tissue really does not stretch. I mean, you would have to apply enormous loads to stretch this tissue, and there would be no point to stretching it. But having said that, it is still a good idea to stretch the muscles that are attaching to the IT, the one in back, that large gluteus maximus, the one in front, the TFL, okay? Especially if one of these is overly tight, that's a completely proper thing to do. And you can also use foam rolling to do that, which we are going to be getting into later episodes.
So we want to leave you with some strategies for how to deal with this. Now, you may not be a runner, you may not be a hiker, maybe you do other things, but it's taking note of any of the areas where you're noticing that there might be pain, or you might notice that there's some kind of a compensation going on, and ways that you can address that so that it doesn't become that domino. Okay, so Jeremy's going to take us through those injury reduction steps.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps first a quick preface, okay? If we haven't made it very clear at this point, while we're wanting to prevent compensatory movement, we're wanting to prevent chronic injuries, and we're going to now give you some specific pointers about this. I just don't want anybody to walk away thinking that compensatory movement is a completely horrible thing. Because the reality is that there is a time and place to compensate. And especially in the military, I mean, when duty calls, then that is when you're gonna be, at a super maximal rate of work. That's when you're going to compensate. When you're trying to win a race, right, you're going to compensate, right? But when you're training, then there's probably no need. Let's get to the root of problems while we can do that, while we have time to do that, the luxury to do it while in training. Okay, so one of the most important, although it can appear very boring, is gradual but progressive overload. Okay, so what I mean by that is that when you are exercising, you are putting stress on a muscle. The idea with progressive overload is to not, when you're done, apply another stress until you have completely healed from that initial stress. And preferably not until after you have fully healed from it and even become stronger. That's how the body will react to a stress. If it's not been overdone, it's not just going to recuperate from the stress. It's going to over recuperate. It's going to become even stronger. Okay? And this can be complicated. I mean, it's hard for me to say precisely how much rest you need. Although I guess I'm sort of crossing into the next precaution, aren't I, Heather?
So when we talk about the gradual overload, you've probably heard the rule of thumb of about a 5 to 10% increase in progression per week, whether it be the length of time you're working out, the distance you're going, the weight that you're lifting. All of those would be factors that come into overload. 5 to 10% is a great number to go with. There are also other studies that have shown that some athletes do really well up around 20%. But here's the caveat. You have to be doing that without noticing that pain or discomfort, and you have to feel that you are rested. If you are the person that tends to be more on the injury prone side of that, where maybe you're having shin pain or you're having knee pain or foot pain, then the 5 to 10% is going to probably be more appropriate for you. And you need to back it off probably until you're not seeing those kinds of stressors happening in the body where you're having chronic pain. So for some of us, that could be even smaller than 5%. As long as it's a percent forward, you're moving forward. If you're lucky enough to have a body that is adapting well at 20% without any issues going on in the body, then that is also okay as well. But it's really finding that sweet spot for yourself. So as Jeremy said, it's difficult for us to prescribe a specific amount, although the 5 to 10% is sort of the generic that we generally go with.
Mm-hmm. And Heather, what makes this even trickier, and I was the prime example of this when I was doing Ironman, is that while I was compensating, I wasn't just unaware of it. While I was overdoing it, I wasn't just unaware of it. I wasn't feeling pain. Mm-hmm. And well, I mean, that's to say I wasn't feeling pain until there was a catastrophic failure of my musculoskeletal system. And I had to basically learn to rewalk. I mean, I remember the very second that this happened. I really do. I remember the very first time my foot planted on the belt of the treadmill and it was turned this weird way. Anyway, at the risk of digressing, movement activation is what I wish I had known back then. Actually, this wasn't a case of not knowing it. This was a case of thinking that I was infallible and not caring. But movement activation is something that I wish I had taken more seriously. So you might accuse me of just using a fancy term here for warming up. And in large part, warming up is synonymous with movement activation, but it is actually not the same thing. So what do I mean by movement activation? Well, I mean, especially for running, like we've talked about I don't know if I called it this per se, but we talked about the lateral rotator group. We talked about the muscles that are in the back of the pelvis, and they control the position side to side of that thigh bone. I mean, so movement activation is activating the muscles that maybe don't do a lot of the gross work of movement, but do the supportive work. Okay, that enable us perhaps not to. They're not the ones that generate the bulk of the force of movement, but they're the ones that enable us to move properly in ways where stress is not accumulating that doesn't need to accumulate. Okay, so this brings us to, Heather, do we want to talk about our handout now?
Yes, so I do have a handout for you that Jeremy's put together for muscle activation. For running, it would also be very beneficial for a walking program. So if that is part of your routine and you would like to learn a little bit more about how to do that muscle activation correctly, feel free to hit the download now. And that'll just go to your computer and you can print it at your leisure or look at it on your computer as well. Okay. So we want to leave you with a few thoughts today. So takeaways for us for packing your gym bag. Starting off with just thinking about, as Jeremy has said, compensations aren't always a bad thing or something to be feared, but recognizing that there are certain compensation patterns that can lead to a minor pain, which could lead to a major problem for you. So taking a look at how you're moving and are you noticing any of that chronic pain and maybe addressing it at its lowest level when possible.
Right. And completely important point here is that one, failure when it happens, even if you're not aware of it and it's not producing any pain, it's, if unguarded, if not cured, this is going to more than likely produce another one, which is going to produce another one, which is going to produce another one, until you get to a complete failure point. So that's why it's best to start to correct ourselves early on.
Right. And as we've said, we just want you to think about progressing your fitness gradually. Don't try to be weekend warriors or stuff all of your training for a ultra marathon into a very short period of time. We really want to be thinking about planning appropriately for our goals so that we have the time to progress safely through any activities that we want to do.
And so important as well, it's for your training to be consistent but within that consistency, for rest itself to also be consistent and appropriate to the stress that you're applying. Mm-hmm. That could be the single most effective way to avoid starting a domino effect that we've talked about.
And prepare your body with those muscle activation exercises, not necessarily the ones that Jeremy gave us today if you're not a runner, but there are muscle activation exercises that would be potentially useful for every activity that we choose to do. So if you're unaware of what those should be and including them into your warm-up, potentially reach out to your FNS staff to seek that help, or from your ComRec staff if you are not military. All fitness professionals should be aware of those muscle activation exercises and be able to help you. It can be something as simple as doing a few glute bridges before you do some squatting to activate the gluteus maximus and get those hamstrings firing so that we are using the correct muscles when we are going into those squat patterns.
Definitely. Every CAP member out there, at large basis, this is sometimes difficult, but you have staff that are dedicated, to taking care of your needs. And if you are having if you're noticing that you're not moving properly or that movement is causing pain, you have staff that are more or less dedicated to taking that on and helping you. Okay. And so that is all a way of saying that it's especially important that you are listening to these messages that your body are sending you once you receive them. Understand that once you have had a pain response, there may have been several steps of the process that you just didn't sense, right? So that should impress upon you how acute the need is to do something about this before it gets completely out of control, if that's where it's headed.
So leaving you with our resource list that we put up every time, although many of these don't apply to the topic today, they are definitely worthwhile checking out if you're struggling with anything. One of the things that isn't on this list that I will recommend to you from an injury prevention and active living perspective is our DFIT site. So for all of the serving members, going to www.dfit.ca, you can build routines in there. They've all been, there are pre-made routines in there for you to follow. So there's some great tools on there right now, as well as tapping into all of the fitness stuff that all of our sites are doing right now. I know in Edmonton, our quite a few of our FNS staff have done some videos on mobility and on muscle activation, and you can check us out on the PSP Edmonton YouTube site, and they have a lot of great videos on there, as well as across the nation. People have put out so much great stuff for people to follow along with until we can get back in a gym. Okay, yeah. That's great advice, Randy. Yeah, always increase your workload by 5%, but when you're getting back into it is always a good thing to do, and that allows us to sort of navigate any pain that we might be feeling. Okay. Okay, yes, in order to keep your career, right? It's amazing what our bodies can handle. We are truly amazing creatures and what we can tolerate and get through. But honestly, I know that at 48 years old, I wish I had listened to myself a long time ago, and I wish I had taken the advice that I hand out now when I was in my 20s, because I would be doing a lot of activities right now that are not really an option for me anymore. So just bearing that in mind.
If I could add to that, Heather.
Yes.
So it's not just a question of being able to continue doing this career. It's also it's a question of how well you want to be able to do it. Let's take the force evaluation. If you're really wanting to do very well at force, as an example, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is that compensatory movement, in addition to being a source of stress, you are not likely to be moving as efficiently as otherwise if you are compensating. So if this is running, this means you're not going to be running as fast. If this is lifting a sandbag to, let's say, shoulder height or something like that, you're not going to be doing that as quickly. So that's a way of saying that really there's a performance benefit to getting to the root of compensatory movement as well.
Right, absolutely. Thanks for that, Kara. That's a great suggestion there. Always looking for more resources that can help us out with those things. So that is the end for us today. It's just a real snippet of what compensatory movement means. Obviously, we can't cover every single issue that people might be having, or every sport that people might be having, but what we wanted to do was tell a story that could help you to understand what is happening in the body when those things are happening to you. So I'm going to ask you to close today with filling out a couple of our polls, and the first one being, I feel I can apply what I learned today into my daily living in some way. Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you, everybody. And nobody can see these answers but you, everyone, so feel free to just answer honestly. And the last one is just with regards to our Demio platform. We have been in lots of discussions about how to improve and move forward, and thinking about how this could be a new reality for many of us, even once we get back to the workplace, of offering more of this type of online learning for people. Okay. So if you're interested in what we're doing, come back and join us next week for our talk about systems versus goals and achieving results through quality training plans and healthy choices in your life. And you can, tomorrow morning, those links, I believe, go live on our CAF Connection site. If you haven't already registered, you can register for those upcoming sessions then. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today and joining Jeremy. And thank you, Jeremy, for joining us to have some of these conversations.
I'm looking forward to next week when we learn about making exercise the easy choice to make. I love that.
Yeah. And Joanne, if we want to see this session again, they are going to make them live very soon. But right now that isn't available to us. They are in the last little bits of tweaking, and it will eventually be available on the CAF Connection site. Okay. Thank you, Karenza. That's awesome. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Great. Awesome. Lots of good comments coming back for us, Jeremy. Very informative. See you all next week. I don't know if you're seeing those. We are. Yeah. I can just